Have you noticed that your hostas looked absolutely perfect in spring, but now that we're deep into summer, something seems off? The leaves aren't standing as tall. The color isn't as rich. Some leaves are turning yellow before they should. Others are developing brown edges. Maybe you've even started seeing holes, scorch marks, or entire sections collapsing for seemingly no reason at all. And here's the frustrating part. Most gardeners assume the problem is fertilizer, or not enough water, or too much sun, or a mysterious disease. But in reality, the biggest mistake gardeners make with hostas in July isn't any of those things. It's that they're treating July exactly the same way they treated May. Hostas simply don't play by the same rules once summer arrives. In fact, what helps a hosta thrive in spring can actually damage it during the hottest part of summer. That's why every year gardeners unknowingly stress perfectly healthy hostas by continuing to use spring care methods long after the season has changed. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what your hosta needs right now, why most gardeners unknowingly get it wrong, and the simple adjustments that will keep your plants lush, healthy, and beautiful for the rest of the season. Once you understand what's happening beneath the soil and inside those leaves, everything suddenly starts making sense. And there's a good chance you're making at least one of these mistakes in your own garden right now. But first, before we dive into today's video, I have a major announcement. The gardening guide you've been writing to me about for months is finally here. The Plant Once Garden is officially out. You have been incredibly patient with me while I took the time to get this right. It is approximately 150 pages of everything this channel teaches, gathered into one complete reference, designed with a hand-drawn heritage cover and warm cream pages that feel like a guide your grandmother would have owned. Inside, you'll find the 90 perennial plants that come back every year with almost no labor, 6 complete garden plans, the no-labor planting calendar, and the hydrogen peroxide method explained completely. I've also included the specific perennials that bring hummingbirds singing and dancing right outside your window, the chapter on what your garden becomes over 20 years, and the mistakes that kill perennials. This is a reference you can lean on for the rest of your gardening life. You can scan the QR code on your screen right now, or click the link in the pinned comment or description below to get your copy. Thank you again for your patience. Now, back to the garden. Let's start with the biggest mistake of all. When gardeners see their hostas wilting in July, the first instinct is usually to grab the hose every evening and give the plants a quick drink. It feels like the right thing to do. Unfortunately, it's one of the fastest ways to create weak plants. Hostas don't need constant shallow watering. They need deep watering. As a general rule, established hostas require about 1 inch of water each week. That water should ideally be delivered in 1 or 2 deep soaking sessions rather than a little every day. Why? Because roots grow where the moisture is. If you're only wetting the top inch of soil every evening, the roots stay near the surface. Surface roots dry out first. Then the plant becomes dependent on daily watering. The moment you miss a day during a heat wave, the leaves begin collapsing because the root system never learned to grow deeper into cooler soil. Instead, soak the soil slowly. Allow the water to penetrate well below the surface. Deep roots remain cooler. They find moisture that shallow roots never reach, and they make the plant dramatically more resilient during the hottest weeks of summer. But here's where many gardeners become confused. They water deeply once or twice a week, and the hosta still struggles. That's because there's another factor most people never check. Don't judge your soil by looking at the surface. The top inch may appear perfectly moist from dew or a brief shower. Meanwhile, 4 inches down, the soil can be bone dry. That's where hosta roots are actually working. Here's an easy habit. Push your finger 3 or 4 inches into the soil beside the plant. If it's dry at that depth, it's time to water. If it's still cool and slightly damp, leave it alone. This tiny habit eliminates almost all of the guesswork. Instead of watering because the calendar says it's Tuesday, or because the leaves looked a little tired during the afternoon, you water because the soil actually needs it. You'll quickly discover that many gardens require far less watering than people think. Others require considerably more. Every garden is different, which brings us to something many gardeners never consider. We often talk about USDA zones or national climates, but your own backyard contains several completely different environments. A hosta planted in an open flower bed behaves very differently from one growing beneath a mature maple tree. Tree roots are relentless. They steal enormous amounts of water from the surrounding soil. Your hosta isn't only competing with nearby flowers. It's competing with a fully established tree that has thousands upon thousands of roots pulling moisture from the ground every single day. Now consider another common situation. Hostas planted beneath roof overhangs. Many gardeners assume rain is watering those plants. In reality, the roof diverts almost every drop away from them. The surrounding garden gets soaked. The hosta stays dry. These plants often require additional watering even after heavy rainfall. That's why experienced gardeners don't water every hosta the same way. They understand that location changes everything. Look around your garden. Is the hosta beneath a tree? Near a foundation? Close to a driveway that reflects heat? Protected from rainfall by the house? Every one of those factors changes how much moisture the plant actually receives. Learning your own garden's microclimates is one of the biggest differences between beginners and experienced gardeners. Now, there's another watering mistake that quietly opens the door to serious problems. Many people spray the entire plant with a hose. The leaves become soaked. Water collects in the folds. Everything looks refreshed. Unfortunately, appearances can be deceiving. Wet leaves sitting overnight create an ideal environment for fungal diseases. They also make it easier for certain pests and pathogens to spread. Instead, direct the water toward the soil. Keep the foliage as dry as possible. Morning is by far the best time to water. Any moisture that does reach the leaves has plenty of time to dry before evening arrives. Late-night watering leaves the foliage damp for hours. That's exactly what many fungal diseases are waiting for. Healthy watering isn't simply about how much water you apply. It's also about where and when you apply it. Now, if your hosta is growing in the ground, those watering principles solve most problems. But if yours lives in a container, July becomes a completely different challenge. Container hostas are beautiful. They're perfect for patios. They brighten shady porches. They work wonderfully beside entryways. But they're living under conditions that are completely different from plants growing in the ground. Garden soil acts like insulation. It remains surprisingly cool several inches below the surface. Containers don't have that protection. The sides of the pot absorb sunlight all day long. Dark plastic containers become especially hot. Dark ceramic pots can become even hotter. That heat transfers directly into the soil. Eventually, the root ball itself begins heating up. The leaves may look perfectly fine. Meanwhile, underground, the roots are experiencing temperatures far higher than those in surrounding garden beds. In severe heat, roots can actually become damaged long before the leaves show obvious symptoms. Many gardeners think they're seeing drought stress. In reality, they're seeing heat stress inside the container. Fortunately, there are simple solutions. Instead of leaving pots isolated in direct afternoon heat, group them together. The containers shade one another. Another excellent trick is placing a smaller dark pot inside a larger light-colored decorative planter. That air gap between the two pots acts like insulation. It dramatically reduces how much heat reaches the roots. Even moving containers a few feet into brighter shade during heat waves can make an enormous difference. Remember, hostas love bright shade. They do not enjoy baking roots. There's another hidden problem with container gardening that almost nobody talks about. Think about what happens each time you water a pot thoroughly. Water enters through the top and drains out the bottom. As it leaves, it carries dissolved nutrients with it. During spring, this isn't a major issue. During July, many container hostas require watering almost every day. Sometimes twice a day during extreme heat. That constant flushing gradually removes the nutrients the plant depends on. Garden hostas have access to surrounding soil. Container hostas only have what's inside the pot. Once those nutrients disappear, they're gone. This is why gardeners sometimes notice beautiful spring growth followed by disappointing midsummer performance. The plant isn't necessarily sick. The soil has simply become depleted. Instead of one heavy feeding early in the season, container plants generally perform better with very light, diluted feeding while they're actively growing. The goal isn't rapid growth. It's replacing the nutrients that frequent watering keeps washing away. Of course, timing matters. Later in the video, we'll discuss exactly when fertilizing should stop completely and why feeding too late in the season often creates more problems than it solves. But before we get there, we need to address the reason so many beautiful hostas suddenly lose their color every July. And it has nothing to do with watering. It has everything to do with sunlight. Here's something many gardeners discover the hard way. The perfect hosta location in April may become the worst possible location in July. The sun changes. Its angle shifts higher. Trees leaf out differently. Shadows move. Areas that received soft morning light during spring can suddenly receive hours of harsh afternoon sunshine in midsummer. That's why hostas often look fantastic all spring, only to begin declining once summer reaches its peak. If your hosta is struggling, don't just ask yourself how much sun it receives. Ask yourself when it receives that sun. Because one part of the day matters more than any other. Between noon and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, sunlight becomes dramatically more intense. Those 4 hours determine whether many hostas thrive or slowly burn. A location that receives gentle morning sun followed by afternoon shade is usually ideal. A location blasted by direct sun from noon until 4 is where problems begin. Many gardeners never revisit their planting locations after spring. Experienced gardeners do. They walk through the garden during midsummer. They observe where the shadows fall. They notice which plants suddenly receive direct afternoon exposure. Sometimes moving a hosta just a few feet completely changes its performance. Sometimes pruning a nearby tree changes everything. Sometimes adding a taller companion plant creates just enough filtered shade to solve the problem permanently. Understanding sunlight isn't simply about hours. It's about intensity. And that leads directly to one of the most misunderstood forms of hosta damage. One of the biggest misconceptions about hostas is believing that scorched leaves will somehow recover once the weather cools down. They won't. When a hosta leaf develops those pale white patches, crispy brown edges, or papery sections, that tissue is permanently damaged. It cannot turn green again. No fertilizer will fix it. No special tonic will reverse it. No amount of watering will repair those burned cells. The good news is that the crown of the plant usually survives just fine. As long as the roots remain healthy, the hosta will produce a fresh set of perfect leaves next spring. Your job isn't to save the damaged leaf. Your job is to stop more leaves from being damaged. That usually means correcting the light exposure immediately. Sometimes that's as simple as moving a container. Sometimes it's relocating the plant during autumn. Sometimes it's creating temporary afternoon shade during the hottest weeks of summer. The sooner you remove the cause, the healthier the rest of the season will be. But not all hostas react to sunlight the same way. Some are dramatically more sensitive than others. If you've ever grown varieties like Halcyon, Blue Angel, or other blue hostas, you've probably noticed something strange. Sometimes they gradually become green. Many gardeners assume that's completely normal. Part of it is. But direct afternoon sun accelerates the process dramatically. Here's why. Blue hostas aren't actually blue. Their leaves are naturally green. The blue appearance comes from a delicate waxy coating that covers the surface of the leaf. That coating reflects light differently. It's what creates that beautiful powder blue appearance gardeners love. Unfortunately, intense afternoon sun gradually melts and wears away that wax. Once it's gone for the rest of the season. No fertilizer brings it back. No spray restores it. The only way to see that blue color again is to wait for an entirely new set of leaves next spring. That's why blue hostas deserve the shadiest locations in the garden. Protect the wax, and you'll protect the color. Walk through any nursery and you'll notice enormous differences between hosta varieties. Some leaves are thick, deeply corrugated, and almost leathery. Others are smooth, delicate, and paper-thin. That isn't just about appearance. It's about durability. Large, thick-leaved varieties like Sum and Substance, or heavily puckered hostas, naturally tolerate difficult conditions much better. Their heavier leaves resist scorching more effectively. They also offer greater resistance to certain pests because the tougher tissue is harder to penetrate. On the other hand, thin-leaved hostas require much more protection. The same is true for many heavily variegated varieties with bright white centers or margins. White tissue contains very little chlorophyll. That makes it beautiful, but also fragile. These plants burn faster. They lose moisture faster. They often show stress before solid green varieties do. If you own one of these delicate cultivars, don't assume it can handle the same conditions as your darker green hostas. It can't. Choosing the right location becomes even more important. Many gardeners think shade only comes from trees. But you can actually build shade into your garden. One of the smartest long-term strategies is companion planting. Instead of placing a hosta by itself in an exposed bed, surround it with taller perennials or shrubs positioned to the south or west. These plants intercept the harshest afternoon sunlight. They create a cooler microclimate. The hosta still receives plenty of filtered light, but the brutal afternoon rays never reach the leaves directly. This creates a much more natural woodland environment, exactly what hostas evolved to grow in. Rather than constantly reacting to summer problems every year, you're designing the garden so the problems never develop in the first place. By the way, if you're looking to completely transform your yard into a low-maintenance paradise, don't forget that my full reference guide, The Plant Once Garden, is now officially available. It's 150 pages, covering all the perennial foundations and permanent setups we talk about on this channel. You can scan the QR code right here on the screen, or find the link in the pinned comment below to grab your copy. Now, let's get right back into today's topic. Mulch is one of the best things you can give a hosta, but it's also one of the easiest ways to kill one. That sounds contradictory. The difference is where you place it. Organic mulch helps keep the soil cool. It slows evaporation. It suppresses weeds. As it breaks down, it gradually improves the soil. 2 to 4 inches of shredded bark, leaf mulch, or pine needles can dramatically improve growing conditions during summer. But never pile that mulch directly against the stems. The crown of a hosta needs to breathe. If mulch stays pressed against it, moisture remains trapped. Airflow disappears. The base stays constantly damp. Eventually, fungi begin attacking the crown itself. That's crown rot. And once crown rot becomes severe, recovery is difficult. Always leave 2 or 3 inches of bare soil around the center of the plant. Cover the roots, not the crown. It's a tiny detail, but it's one that separates healthy hostas from declining ones. Many gardeners assume that if their hosta looks tired in July, it must need fertilizer. Usually it doesn't. Hostas planted in good garden soil are surprisingly light feeders. If you've incorporated compost or organic matter into your beds over the years, that's often enough. What they don't need is a heavy nitrogen feeding late in summer. Nitrogen pushes soft, tender growth. That fresh growth doesn't have enough time to mature before cold weather arrives. When frost comes, that tender tissue is damaged first. Instead of helping next year's performance, late feeding often weakens it. As a general guideline, stop fertilizing garden hostas by the end of July. Let the plant naturally begin preparing for dormancy. There's one important exception: container hostas. Because nutrients wash out so quickly, container plants can receive one final light-balanced feeding in early July. After that, stop. Let the plant slow down naturally. There's another reason not to panic if you used a slow-release fertilizer earlier in spring. Those tiny coated granules are still working. Heat actually speeds up their release. Even if you've stopped fertilizing manually, nutrients may still be entering the soil from those granules throughout midsummer. So don't assume the plant suddenly needs more. There's a very good chance the real culprit is a slug. Slugs spend the day hiding beneath boards, rocks, dense mulch, flower pots, and thick vegetation. Once darkness arrives, they emerge to feed. They're surprisingly efficient. A healthy-looking hosta can look completely different after only a few nights. One of the most effective ways to control them costs almost nothing. Go outside about an hour after sunset with a flashlight. Check your hostas carefully. Hand pick every slug you find. Drop them into a bucket of soapy water. Repeat this for 3 consecutive nights. You'll remove a remarkable number of them. Then reduce the places they like hiding. Clear away unnecessary debris. Lift old boards. Thin, overcrowded vegetation around the plants. Improve airflow. A drier garden is a much less attractive home for slugs. If you prefer a passive approach, iron phosphate pellets work extremely well. They're considered much safer around pets and wildlife than many older slug baits and naturally break down over time. For container hostas, copper tape around the rim can also discourage slugs from climbing into the pot. Not every damaged leaf is caused by insects. Sometimes the problem is much more serious. If you notice perfectly defined yellow or brown streaks running between the veins of the leaf, pay close attention. Those straight angular patterns can indicate foliar nematodes. Unlike slug holes, these markings follow the structure of the leaf itself. These microscopic worms spread through films of water sitting on leaves. That's another reason overhead watering causes problems. If you suspect foliar nematodes, remove the affected leaves immediately. Throw them into the trash. Never compost them. Then switch strictly to watering the soil only. Early action can dramatically reduce further spread. There's one problem every hosta gardener hopes they never see. Hosta virus X, often shortened to HVX. This virus doesn't create ordinary yellowing. Instead, you'll notice strange ink-like patterns, almost as though watercolor has bled across the leaf. Sometimes the foliage becomes puckered. Sometimes distorted ring patterns appear. Growth becomes abnormal. Unfortunately, there is no cure. An infected hosta should be removed completely. Don't compost it. Dispose of it with household trash. Just as importantly, disinfect every shovel, knife, or pruner that touched the plant before using it elsewhere. One simple method is soaking the tools in undiluted 3% hydrogen peroxide. That extra step can prevent accidentally spreading the virus throughout your collection. One of the biggest mistakes gardeners make is assuming every piece of advice applies everywhere. It doesn't. A gardener in Minnesota faces completely different challenges than someone gardening in Florida. Someone in England has very different concerns from someone gardening in Arizona. If you live in a tropical or subtropical climate with heavy summer rainfall, watering usually isn't the biggest concern. Drainage is. Too much moisture encourages fungal diseases. Elevated containers and well-drained soil become essential. Gardeners in the United Kingdom often experience cooler summers with much higher humidity. Heat stress is usually less severe, but slugs and fungal diseases become far more common. Many hostas there tolerate brighter conditions than they would in hotter climates. Canadian gardeners experience tremendous variation depending on location. Coastal British Columbia has a completely different climate than the prairie provinces. Interior regions often experience intense but relatively short summers, followed by rapid cooling in late August. Preparing plants for dormancy becomes especially important. If you're gardening in Hosta Zone 4, your growing season is short. Early frosts arrive quickly. Stopping fertilizer on time becomes critical. Zones 5 and 6 often experience brief but intense heat waves before temperatures begin dropping toward autumn. Temporary shade during those hottest periods can prevent permanent leaf damage. Zones 7 and 8 face prolonged summer heat combined with humidity. Afternoon shade becomes increasingly important. Some sensitive varieties even appreciate protection from stronger morning sun by midsummer. And if you garden in Zone 9, think filtered woodland conditions. Many hostas simply cannot tolerate prolonged direct sunlight there. Consistent moisture and heavy shade become essential for success. The key lesson is simple. Always adapt gardening advice to your own climate. Your garden is unique. Treat it that way. Let's quickly review the most important points. Water deeply, not daily. Check the soil 4 inches down before reaching for the hose. Pay attention to microclimates created by trees, buildings, and hard surfaces. Water the soil instead of soaking the leaves. Protect container roots from excessive heat. Remember that frequent watering washes nutrients from pots. Watch where the afternoon sun falls between noon and 4. Protect blue hostas to preserve their waxy coating. Give delicate varieties extra shade. Mulch the roots. Never bury the crown. Stop fertilizing by the end of July unless you're lightly feeding containers earlier in the month. Control slugs before they multiply. Recognize the warning signs of foliar nematodes and Hosta virus X. And most importantly, observe your plants. Hostas tell you what they need. You simply have to learn how to read the signs. Healthy hostas aren't created by expensive products. They're created by understanding how these woodland plants actually live in nature and recreating those conditions in your own garden. Do that consistently, and year after year you'll have larger clumps, richer foliage, stronger roots, and far fewer problems. If you're ready to stop wasting time on plants that die every winter and finally build a garden that takes care of itself, don't forget to grab your copy of The Plant Once Garden. It's 150 pages of everything this channel teaches, completely mapped out for you. Just scan the QR code on your screen right now, or click the link in the description below to get started. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.